So before you can kind of properly control and optimize your Azure costs, you need to understand where those costs originate, and who is driving those costs within your organization. So if you're already on Azure, obviously if you're not on there at the moment and you're looking to move, this isn't particularly relevant. But once you do have workloads on there, there's a cost management and billing tool within Azure that allows you to look at things like cost, showing the total usage and purchase costs for the current month. So really just effectively a digital version of what your bill looks like. You can forecast within here, so looking at your cost to date and where that's going to end up. So in the graphic that we're looking at there, we're looking at that kind of red line. So if the trend continues for this month, you've got an idea of forecasting of what your budget, of what your overall spend will be by the time you get to the end of that month. You can set different periods for that. It doesn't have to be over a month. You can do it over different periods. It just gives you an idea of where costs are going, which is important. Important, especially if you set yourself a budget. So you may not know in the first few months of using Azure where your cost will be. You'll have an estimate that you will be able to calculate from the services you're deploying. But as you settle down and understand what your costs are month to month, you may well want to set a budget, and that budget may apply to your entire infrastructure, or more likely broken down into perhaps it could be departments, it could be budgets associated with different projects and things like that. You can look at that budget, you can look at where your spend is for now, and again get an idea what your planned spending is going to be compared to what's happening so far during the month or during that period. Accumulated granularity. So this is showing your aggregate daily costs. So whatever your billing period is, usually a month, what you've consumed so far. And this is the information you would use to go ahead and create a budget. You can literally just hover over individual dates to view the accumulated cost for that individual day, and that's helpful looking for kind of spikes that are happening. Perhaps you'll look at this bill and say, oh, hang on, this looks like we're a little bit further ahead of my budget. Why is that? And you can drill into that individual day and see why you have more expensive day that day. Did someone deploy something they weren't supposed to deploy? Did you have an unforeseen occurrence happen that meant that you end up using more resources than was expected? And then within there, you can see those sort of pivot charts or donut charts, we call them. Essentially, these are dynamic charts that allow you to sort of click on each one, drill into, and see the different information. They can show absolutely everything right down to the kind of smallest costs, but it helps you get more sort of granular and understand more in detail, kind of what you've been spending on and kind of where that's going. This is just kind of the front view that you see. You can kind of go in and change the views as you go. You can look at things like the accumulated costs. What have you spent so far? Am I going to stay within my budget? Daily costs over the last 30 days. We said trying to look for spikes. You can drill into using those pivot charts. Cost by service. What have I spent on virtual machine resources for the last 3 months? And also, get a full history of all your invoice details in there. So this, like I said, is a tool within Azure already. If you're on Azure, you're probably already using it. But this is something that helps you monitor your costs and look at forecasting. So next, we're going to look at cost optimization around, what can you do to save money? So there's a few different programs out there that you may or may not be aware of. The first one is Azure Hybrid Benefit. Azure Hybrid Benefit is part of your benefits to do with software assurance. So if you've got on-prem software assurance licensing for Windows Server and SQL Server licenses, you can apply that license for Windows or SQL to your servers that are running in Azure. So if you are moving from on-prem into Azure, a server, you can take the license with you if you have that software assurance. If you look at the costs on Azure Calculator of a lot of the resources, a lot of the VMs, most of the cost is actually made up by the licensing, so that can have a really, really big benefit in terms of what your overall spend is month to month on Azure. One of the other benefits, which is good, you get 180 days of dual use rights with it, so you can maintain what you've got on-prem while you're migrating to Azure. So it doesn't have to be kind of a big bang approach for those services. You can sort of move across at your own pace. And beyond sort of Windows Server and SQL, they started to allow you to apply that benefit for Red Hat and other Linux licensing as well. Next is reserved instances. So reserved instances is essentially 1 and 3 year commitments that you make to Microsoft for virtual machines that you're running. So if you're able to look at your workloads that are running on virtual machines and say, yep, I know from my understanding of how we use this application and kind of the plans moving forward, this will be in place for 12 or 36 months. You can apply for a reserved instance, which brings down your overall spend on a month-to-month basis compared to running it as pay-as-you-go. It's quite easy to purchase, do it within a few steps within the portal. You can exchange and cancel reservations as your kind of needs change. You don't have to sort of, it's much more flexible than perhaps most people would initially think. Microsoft are just really concerned about what your spend is. How you change that within the reserved instances you can do quite a lot with it. It helps a lot, when you're looking to budget and forecast better. You can even do, if you've got more cash and you prefer capex, you can actually use upfront payments as well for the 1 year and 3 year terms. So if that was your choice, much more reduced overall monthly costs. Another good saving, if you are developing on Azure, you have test environments, you can save around 50% for test and dev. The only caveat with that is that you need to have a Visual Studio subscription. So as long as you're maintaining that Visual Studio subscription, you can get those discounted rates going forward. It's only for non-production workloads, so bear that in mind. It is purely for test and for development. There's lots of services available in there, and you can run things like the app service, SQL database, as well as VMs. And yeah, you get a much reduced rate compared to sort of for your full production services. So on top of the kind of programs that Microsoft put out there, you can make some tactical decisions on how to kind of save money. So if you're not looking to reserve instances, if you have a workload that you don't want to commit to for that period of time, or even if you do, you can sometimes see a better benefit by shutting those servers down if they're not used, on a 24/7 basis. So if you've got services that perhaps you only use for a week during the month, applications that are only relevant around payroll time or some other function within the business, not running those servers when they don't need to be run to have a massive impact. So it is simple maths as if you only have a service that needs to be on 12 hours a day and you can shut it down, straight away you've got a 50% discount on what you're spending compared to if you were just running those servers. If you only need it for 8 hours a day, 2/3 of the cost is gone. So pretty simple stuff, but it is things that people miss, especially if you come from an on-prem environment where your costs are sunk within that environment, and whether things are on or off, it's still costing you the same. It's something that's worth sort of bearing in mind. In terms of server sizes, you can, I can't remember how many there are in all. There's literally hundreds of different instance sizes that are specific to different types of servers that potentially you need to run. So if you are a heavy memory user, you can find something that an instance size is memory optimized. If you're heavy on CPU usage, the same for that. If storage is the key thing that you need to be concerned about, performance for a VM, again, you can kind of apply those. So every 7 days, Azure Advisor will run, and it will monitor your servers, and it will come back and give you recommendations. So it used to look at, it's always looked at things like your IOPS, your CPU usage, your RAM usage, but they've taken feedback on board from that, and actually now the advice that comes through Advisory is much more intelligent in the way that it collects information. So in a basic way, what it would do is the advisor would look at your VM that's running. It may have a look and say, you've been running at 40% CPU over the last week. The CPUs that you've got for this VM isn't appropriate. It's overspec. You can resize this and save yourself money. That always used to work within the same sort of family of instances, but they've extended that now, and the intelligence is there that it will look across all the different instance sizes that you've got within the whole of the kind of choice of instance sizes for Azure, and it will find the one that fits best, and will advise you of that based on performance. It can give you advice for scaling up as well, but the majority of kind of recommendations you'll see within the advisor is around scaling down, as people do tend to overspec VMs sizes, for what they need. Another thing that they started to do, which was not available before, is looking at the different versions for your for those individual VM sizes. So if your workload is running on one of the older versions, generally the next version that will have much more powerful sort of CPU. It will have better features for the individual versions as they get newer, as they start running on newer hardware. If Advisor can find you a virtual machine instance that's a newer version, that gives you benefits, but without having an impact on cost, it will also make that recommendation as well. So perhaps not resizing, but certainly improving in terms of the value you're getting for your money. And then the last one, moving to PaaS. So if you require full control of your virtual machine that's running your application, then PaaS isn't potentially for you, but there are very few applications out there where that kind of really is the case. Some of the costs that you're saving here might not be direct costs. The hidden costs associated with this will be around the configuration, the administration of that VM. But in my personal experience, in sort of practical terms, looking at PaaS services, they're generally cheaper to run than running the same service on the VM. Once you take out the licensing cost that you're not paying for, as we said, you add in some of that hidden cost around configuration, administration. There's savings to be made there. But also, a lot of PaaS services will have things in like backups built in. Availability is usually higher. Looking at the SLAs you'll get on a PaaS service compared to a VM. Certainly a single VM, those are all much higher, and generally a much lower cost. So in terms of costs, understanding your bills, there's tools available there for you to be able to monitor, be able to set budgets, to be able to allocate spending to individual teams or projects within that. Within the environment, and you can forecast costs, so you kind of know what your future bills are going to look like. existing costs that you've got already, you can optimize those looking at Azure Advisor. It's an automated tool. Essentially, it will make recommendations for you. You can implement those. You can do a well-architected review of your environment, and this kind of counts for all of the pillars really that we're going to discuss, to look at, is there areas where you can save on cost.